Once you walk onto that mainland, you're on your own.
There's no discharge in the war.
What is up, everybody? Jeremy Eisenfire here, and welcome to the channel. With the release date of 28 years later just around the corner now, we are continuing to get some new and intriguing information. This time straight from director Danny Boyle himself, as he sat down for a very interesting and lengthy interview with co-stars Aaron Taylor Johnson and Jodie Comer during a screening for the upcoming film. The three of them were recently in New York for a very special screening of the first 28 minutes of 28 Years Later, after which they gave a very informative interview when taking questions from the moderator, and revealed some new information about the upcoming film and what we can expect to see. And he even gave a small hint as to who the potential main villain of the trilogy is going to be, as he talked a little bit about Jack O'Connell's upcoming character, and how he apparently is going to be a very big part of the end of the film, and how much of a treat it was creating this character. Up until this point, Jack O'Connell's role in the upcoming 28 Years Later has been shrouded in mystery, with us not getting even a single glimpse of him in any of the trailers. But in a recent interview, Jack O'Connell himself did go on to state that his role in the upcoming 28 Years Later might be the darkest role that he's ever played. Many might recognize Jack O'Connell for some of his most recent work in Sinners, as he played not only the main antagonist but head vampire of the film. And now with 28 Years Later, it seems that he is potentially stepping into another main antagonist role. But who exactly is Jack O'Connell going to be playing, and how exactly is he going to be the potential main villain of the film? Up until this point, there has been a vast amount of fan speculation and predictions as to who he will be playing, with many thinking that he is going to be playing some kind of cult leader in 28 Years Later living on the mainland, which he very well could be. But part of me is starting to think that his character is not going to be quite as simple as that. And something about Danny Boyle's statement stood out to me the most. How he describes Jack O'Connell's character as showing up at the end of the film, not being in the entire film, which leads me to believe that he might not be the main villain of this first film, but the main villain of the entire trilogy itself. Could we end up seeing Jack O'Connell's character show up at the very end of the film, setting him up for the Bone Temple and beyond, while getting a rather dark introduction as to what kind of character this is going to be? And could the main antagonist of the first film simply be the infected, or maybe even the alpha infected that we have recently seen, with them setting up Jack O'Connell's villain to be a more overarching one for the second and third film? And while we don't know a whole lot of definitive information as to who Jack O'Connell is going to be playing, we do, however, get a few subtle hints that he could potentially be this mysterious Jimmy character that we see in the trailer, with his name not only being on the side of a building next to a quote from the Book of Revelations, but with his name also being carved in the chest of the infected we see hanging upside down. And on top of that, we see what could potentially be a younger version of Jimmy as a child during what is now being referred to as the Teletubby massacre scene, as we see what appears to be his aunt coming in telling him to stay quiet, which appears to be a flashback to the day the outbreak first began. And some have even theorized that young Jimmy, seeing his family slaughtered in such a manner, goes on to mold the character that he later becomes, with some fans even going on to theorize that he has some potential connection to the priest we see in the trailers as well, which some also believe could be the catalyst that molds Jimmy into a cult-like leader, as the priest himself was very much under the impression that the rage virus was Judgment Day, which could explain the Book of Revelations quote we see written on the wall a little bit more. "Behold, Jimmy, he is coming with the clouds," a quote referring to the second coming of Jesus. Could this potentially start to explain why Jack O'Connell described his character in 28 Years Later to be the darkest he's ever played? Could he be playing a religious extremist of sorts that has amassed his own following and has some very strange beliefs on what the rage virus is and why it was sent to Earth? Just like the priest before him, could he also share a similar belief that the rage virus was sent as a form of Judgment Day for humanity? If so, there really is no telling just how dark this character could potentially be. After all, there usually tends to be no limits as to what a religious extremist is willing to do, especially if they believe they have a divine purpose. One thing's for sure, though, it definitely seems like Jack O'Connell's character is going to be something pretty interesting, as they are keeping his role in the upcoming film more secretive than anything else. and I certainly cannot wait to see what it really is. Danny Boyle also went on to talk a little bit about their original outline for the upcoming 28 Years Later, and how it has vastly changed from its original form.
And we did do an original idea, which was sort of what you'd expect, really. It was like a weaponise the virus type sequel. You know, like an agency or a government or a military or something gets the virus and weaponises it.
And personally, I am actually very glad that they scrapped their original idea of having a government agency come in and weaponize the rage virus. And while I'm confident Alex Garland and Danny Boyle would have been able to create a compelling story around that premise, at the end of the day, it is a trope that has been way overused. The evil government agency coming in and messing everything up. So I'm certainly very excited that they pivoted to what appears to be something that is much more character-driven in nature, which in my opinion is always a better choice for storytelling, focusing deeper on the characters involved and not just the events surrounding them, and describes each one of these three films as being able to stand alone on their own merit, but also telling a grander tale that is connecting each one of them in the long run, which in my opinion is exactly the kind of format that you want to see in a trilogy like this. Movies that are capable of being incredibly entertaining on their own, but also connect to a much larger tale overall, which is something that many trilogies these days miss the mark on completely, where it seems each film is simply set up for the next film, and ultimately fail at telling a satisfying story within each installment. We also got an interesting hint from Danny Boyle as to the fate of Cillian Murphy's Jim and the characters from the original 28 Days Later, and how he says he's not allowed to reveal what happened to them just yet, indicating that they most likely are still alive out there somewhere and will probably be making an appearance at some point in the trilogy, which we have been getting multiple hints as to Cillian Murphy's involvement up until this point, and he is attached to the trilogy as an executive producer as well. We also hear a little bit from Aaron Taylor Johnson and Jodie Comer about their characters, and how character-driven the story in 28 Years Later is, with Jamie's character in particular being somewhat of a flawed hero, and talks a little bit about the difficulties his character faces while trying to prepare his son for the real world, while also acknowledging his own flaws along the way. We have already seen in the 5-minute preview that Jamie is rigorously trying to prepare his son for the dangers of life outside of the community, and while his tactics may be considered a little bit extreme, they are necessary at the end of the day to prepare Spike to become a man. Danny Boyle also went on to talk a little bit about some of the unique filming techniques that went into making 28 Years Later, and how a decent portion of the movie was filmed using the iPhone Pro 15 Max, and how they didn't just use a single iPhone, but in some cases using custom-built rigs with up to 20 iPhones on them at a time, capturing multiple different angles and shots all at once. Not only does the compact size make it far easier to set up, but also allows for much better movement as well, while the phone's constant presence means you can capture unexpected shots much more easily, and of course is far more cost-effective as well, making it the perfect tool for upcoming independent filmmakers. And while the more traditional cameras like the Reflex 435 may offer better image quality in certain conditions, some of the newest iPhone models, like the iPhone 15 Pro Max, are capable of capturing beautiful 4K imagery. And with added features like Apple Log and ProRes, it allows for even more control during post-production. I certainly get the feeling that 28 Years Later and other films using similar techniques are going to be blazing the trail for a whole new way of filmmaking to come. And once more studios figure out how cost-effective it really is, I imagine we're going to see this adopted much more in the future. After all, the first two 28 Years Later films, this one and The Bone Temple, were shot using only a $75 million budget in total, which is incredibly low for today's standards in Hollywood. And the first 28 Days Later film only had an $8 million budget in total, allowing for a massive profit margin for both of these films. Danny Boyle also went on to talk a little bit about the format of the upcoming film, and how they shot it using a 2:7:6 aspect ratio, which allows for a much more widescreen shot, to better showcase the surrounding area and vast landscape shots like we see in the trailers. Danny Boyle also talked a little bit about how it creates a sense of isolation, where you can get the feeling that the character is very much isolated in this vast world surrounding them. And you certainly do get that sense in some of these shots. In particular, the beautiful shots that we see of Jamie and his son walking or running down the causeway. And when filming in beautiful areas such as this, it's important to showcase as much of the surrounding landscape as you possibly can, making the surrounding world almost a character in and of itself. But overall, I am extremely excited for the upcoming 28 Years Later, and we are just around the corner now. The film will be hitting theaters on June 20th, with the second film in the installment, The Bone Temple, set to hit theaters in January of 2026. So strap in, folks, we have plenty of 28 Years Later to look forward to. But that is going to do it today for our breakdown of some of the latest information coming out surrounding 28 Years Later. And definitely leave your thoughts and comments down below. What kind of character do you think Jack O'Connell will be playing, and what role will he ultimately have in the trilogy? And as always, I want to give a big thank you to everybody out there for watching, and we will see you on the next one.
There's no discharge in the war.